Hello, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and tonight I thought I would talk a bit about working with magical entities. One of you were a while back, Gemma. I don't know. I apologize if I got your name wrong. Um, I had asked about some of my thoughts on magical entities. Of course, I've posted some videos about this topic before, but hey, why not do another one, right? I'm actually um, I'm actually thinking about writing a book on the topic of how to create and work with magical entities. And you may say, well, wait a minute, didn't you already write a book, Creating Magical Entities? And it's like, yeah, I wrote that back in 2002, 2003. So it's been a long time. Um, and I mean, my magical practice with entities has changed over the time. Of course, it's evolved, and so I've been thinking about writing a new book that's just by me, and kind of goes into my own approach to working with magical entities. Not that Creating Magical Entities is a bad book; it's a great one, and it's a timeless classic at this point, I suppose. But no reason not to occasionally revisit things and share where you're going with stuff. So when I think about like why I work with magical entities, and I kind of wanted to share this here with you. I think about it in relationship to how a magical entity can help you transform your approach to magic, in the sense that it allows you to basically create a spirit of sorts, an artificial spirit in a way, I guess, or maybe a program, maybe like we can think of it as a computer program or something like that, but it allows you to create something that then focuses in on a specific problem or situation or whatever, and ideally generates results for you. I've always approached the work with magical entities in terms of what can a magical entity do that I wouldn't necessarily have as easy a time doing. And my reasoning behind that is, when I look at how you work with spirits in general, that if you really work with spirits, there are some people who I would say likely take the approach where they work with spirits and they have spirits try and do everything for them magically. I'm not really in that camp. My focus instead is I'm going to do, I'll do magic or whatever when it's something that I can easily do and address. But when it comes to something where the spirit would be really helpful and it could do something that I couldn't do, then I'll work with the spirit, or I'll create a magical entity. The first magical entity I ever created is an entity called Cervantes, and this is an entity that to this day continues to work. And it's an opportunity entity. It basically helps me find opportunities and makes me aware of them. Now, what I do with those opportunities is up to me. But what I find is that having an entity to work with in that particular way has been very helpful, because I wouldn't necessarily be aware of all the opportunities that would come my way, but I have an entity that's actively looking out for those opportunities and makes sure that it pushes those opportunities to my conscious awareness. I think that I've had the opportunity to take advantage of said opportunities numerous times in life, and it's been kind of a it's been a real blessing, because I have something that's actively looking out for me and making sure that I'm aware of those situations. When I look at my approach to creating an entity, it has changed a bit over the years. Part of it is because of that criteria that I apply, where I'm like, okay, why am I even creating it? What's it going to do? And is this something I can do myself? But part of it also comes down to how I want that entity to basically show up in the world in terms of the effect it could have. How to phrase this a little bit differently. Like if it's in a situation where I wouldn't necessarily have the same amount of control, having an entity there kind of doing what it needs to do is very helpful because it's something I no longer have to worry about. So when I look at creating magical entities, I also look at it in terms of what can I create that can do X, Y, and Z, and I no longer have to think about it, and I can just let it do its work. And so I take a very automated approach in some ways to my work with entities, because really what I'm doing is I'm setting them up, I'm letting them do what they need to do, and I'm going on my merry way. And other than checking in on occasion and making sure that the results are really justifying the entity, not worrying about it. The other thing I've really come to realize is that in certain circumstances, and this is where my criteria about working with an entity has boiled down to, can I do what it could do? Is that I find that if I set an entity onto something that I could do myself, it may not necessarily do as well. And the reason why is because I have a specific understanding in the context of being a human being and dealing with things that that entity won't necessarily have. Whereas if I incorporate an entity into my magical work toward doing something that I can't easily do, I won't necessarily have the same context of understanding that it has, because it's operating on a level of existence that I'm not. Like my opportunity entity, for example, is operating in a place where it's basically focused and fully attuned on opportunities that could come my way. I'm not attuned in that same way. It's not something that would necessarily come as easy to me, because let's be honest here, I live in the material world and my focus is on like front and center what's going on right now. So having an entity that is basically aware of things and kind of available to focus in on the things that I can't easily focus on has helped a lot. But like, for example, I created a sales entity a while back in my days of doing some self-employment. And what I found with the sales entities, it really didn't do a good job. And the reason why was because I would have been better doing that work. It would have been better if I had done some magical work and then, done some mundane actions. Instead, what I ended up doing is I created this entity because there was some part of me that didn't want to deal with it. But the entity wasn't well suited for it either. It was less well suited than I was. So, lesson learned from that. I'm right now actually doing some prosperity magic. I shared a post about it on my blog earlier this week. And it's a good example of, in this case, I set up the prosperity magic, and it's really based around things that I can do as opposed to what the entity could do. And of course, the prosperity magic is working much better because I'm the one taking charge instead of leaving it up to a magical entity. So, I mean, it's really crucial to understand the context of how a magical entity works and what it can do versus what it can't do, because it's going to have certain strengths that you don't have, and at the same time you're going to have certain strengths it doesn't have. And I don't necessarily see this expressed explicitly in the available literature on creating entities. I would even say that in regards to the book that I co-wrote years and years ago. So it's one of those things where this is a nuanced awareness that I've developed over time as I've continued working with the entities and creating them. Like, if I'm going to create an entity, I'm going to create it for the purposes of doing something that isn't something I could easily do. Whereas if it's something I could easily do, then I'll just do the magic myself, or I'll do the mundane work, or a combination thereof. Because it makes more sense for me to do it. I have a better understanding, a better context. I mean, really what we have to understand is that the frame of reference that any spirit operates in is different from our own frame of reference. And if we understand that, it allows us to develop more nuanced magical workings in general, because we figure out, okay, this is in my wheelhouse and this is where I need to show up, versus this is in someone else's wheelhouse and this is where they need to show up, or in this case, the entity needs to show up. And I see you have a couple viewers. Hello and welcome. If you have questions about magical entities, feel free to write a comment. I'll answer them, like why you got me here live. So keep that in mind. So getting back to this, like that's something that I've developed, that nuanced awareness. The other thing that I've really kind of been focusing on over time is developing an approach toward working with magical entities that really is based around how to incorporate them into overall life design. And what I mean by that is, I am very much in favor of creating a proactive life design where your life is gradually shaped and defined in a certain direction. It requires you really being aware of what you want in life, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And then what I like to do is actually, among other, I like to do long-term magical workings to help with this. Some of those magical workings are all about creating enhancements for myself, but some of them are about creating magical entities that basically help to direct and steer life in a specific direction. And so, Serantis being the original entity I created would be a great example of that, actually, ironically enough. Um, but I've also created entities for that sense then that basically are focused around this life design scenario and situation where I'm gradually just steering things in a certain direction. And I find, like, as an example, I created an entity a while back called Spedlimp. This was an entity that I actually created for the purposes of helping me drive safer. Make sure I didn't go over the speed limit, things like that. Make sure that I was aware of the cops and all that other stuff. Well, that to me would be a lifestyle design entity. And why would that be the case? Because this lifestyle design entity is going to shape the way that I drive, even, and make sure that I drive safely, that I'm not going over the speed limit, whatever else, and help me be aware of, cop cars, ambulances, fire trucks, anything like that that would be in the area that I need to be aware of, and even help me navigate better. That seems like may seem like a silly example, but when you find that your driving changes as a result, and that you're driving more safely, and that the way that you're doing, that you're much more aware of the road and everything else, I find that it demonstrates this notion of lifestyle design very well, because what you're doing is you're designing, you're using an entity, in this case, or I am, to design how I even drive, and like what I do that way. But I also even like have like with the neurotransmitter spirits that I work with. They're not really created entities, but it's a good example in its own way. I've really worked with them to help me shape my lifestyle in terms of like how I eat and how I take care of my body and what things I do to take good care of myself. It's a great example of how such work can occur, where you can work with spirits to design your life, to change certain things, to make you more aware of stuff that you wouldn't otherwise focus on, because your frame of reference is so very limited by being a human being in some ways. How we broaden our life awareness, if you will. That's really, in a large sense, part of what my magical work is about, and being able to extend beyond like this limited tunnel vision to like this. And so having magical entities work toward that for me, very helpful, because then I don't even have to necessarily do anything per se, but just let them bring in the information, and then I can soak it in and do whatever I need to do and make better choices accordingly. And I'm all about making better choices, because quite frankly, I want the quality of my life to be excellent. And it's something that I advocate for in magical work in general. Let's not be so reactive. Let's design our lives. Let's be more proactive. Why not? What do we have to lose? That's kind of the way I look at things. So, in any case, that's kind of what I've been doing with magical entities. As I said, I have other videos on this on the YouTube channel. This is on Facebook Live right now, but on the YouTube channel where this is going to be uploaded to, on the topic. So, you can browse through those and see some other things I have to say about magical entities, and you may see a book from me next year. It won't be till next year because I've got some other projects, but I am definitely thinking about it. All right, thanks for watching, and see you next week.